Greetings from the cosmic horrors. The stars are right once again, and the great old ones are allowing us to talk about for 30 minutes H.P. Lovecraft, the horror writer who is a genre unto himself. I am your cosmic host, Mark Griffin, executive of the Lovecraft estate on Yagath, joined in by two from the material world, David Guffey, a professor at Miskatonic University, and Richard Wilson, narrator of the New Coptic Manuscripts audiobook. We will continue exploring Lovecraft's early years. In our last meeting, we learned about the influence of his grandfather on him. We'll begin today talking about the books he read as a child and stayed with him to adulthood. David and Richard, can you guess what book was one of the first books he read as a child?
I should know this. I remember reading it somewhere, but maybe the Arabian Nights.
You're close. There was
Okay.
one of the first books he read was Grimm's Fairy Tales.
Okay.
It was first published December 20th, 1812. Jacob Ludwig Karl Grimm and Wilhelm Karl Grimm, both brothers, were German academics who collected European folklore during the 19th century. They're the ones who introduced the world to Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, Beauty and the Beast, Little Red Riding Hood, and Rapunzel. The majority of them are characters Walt Disney turned into profitable films and relatable merchandise. For an author noted for the cosmic horror, the influence of the fairy tales, besides being supernatural, would not be immediately apparent. Lovecraft was not known for his happily ever afters. Try not to think of them as fairy tales, but as folklore instead. Dr. Tim Evans, an associate professor of folk studies at Western Kentucky University, stated in an essay that Lovecraft's writings embodied much of the ideology that surrounded the interest of folklore and tradition in the United States in the 1920s and 30s. His interest in folklore extended beyond oft-told tales, but also the stories associated with places and buildings. During his times out haunting in the night, he wasn't engaged in illicit activities, but instead admiring the architecture of the city of Providence. Because of his sheltered life, he never formed deep attachments to other people, but instead, as Evans pointed out, formed connections through a very strong sense of place. As an adult, he traveled outside of Providence, similar to the narrator Shadow over Innsmouth, collecting history, folklore, dialect of visited towns, antiquing, as he called it, genealogy, we might call it today. Oddly, he wouldn't always write down what folklore he heard, sometimes just mentioning only that he heard it. When Lovecraft returned home, he wrote travel logs, which were never published during his lifetime. It was when he was out antiquing that Lovecraft wrote his fiction. Aside from Shadow over Innsmouth, he worked his antiquing into his tales. Stories such as Picture in the House, He, started off with a protagonist on a walking tour that ended with horrific encounters. Lovecraft was never inspired by a single folktale to adapt into a story. Instead, they were used as flavoring. A good example is The Shunned House, a 1924 tale where a nameless narrator and his uncle, Dr. Elihu Whipple, investigate an abandoned house. The Shunned House itself is based on at least two real places of residence, including the home of Mrs. H.C. Babbitt of 135 Benefit Street in Providence, where an aunt lived at one time and still stands today. Benefit Street intersects with Angel Street and is only a 22-minute walk from his grandfather's house, so he probably passed by it during his night haunts. Another basis for the Shunned House was the Andrew Jolie House in New Jersey, which reminded Lovecraft of the Babbitt House, describing it as a terrible old house, a hellish place where night-black deeds must have been done in the early 1700s, with blackish unpainted surface, unnaturally steep roof, and an outside flight of stairs leading to the second story, suffocatingly embowed with a tangle of ivy so dense that one cannot imagine it accursed or corpse-fed. Lovecraft would have made a very peculiar realtor. Believed to be buried beneath the Shunned House of the short story was a vampire. Vampires were a subject matter Lovecraft was familiar with. Most people assume these creatures of the night only come from Transylvania, but the New England states had their own accounts of these macabre attackers. One of the most famous happened in Rhode Island when Lovecraft wasn't quite 2 years old. In this account, a 19-year-old woman named Mercy Lena Brown of a remote town called Exeter, or despairingly as Deserted Exeter, which bordered with Connecticut, a state with its own vampire legends, such as in Jewett City. Mercy Lena Brown had died from tuberculosis January 17, 1892. Back then, the disease that involves a high fever, hacking bloody cough, and a visible wasting away of the body was not understood, and believed to be caused by drunkenness and want among the poor. It wouldn't be until 1882 when microbiologist Robert Koch discovered the disease was caused by bacteria. 10 years after discovery, the knowledge was still not well known. In Lovecraft's portion of the United States, tuberculosis was associated with vampirism, and so that it was called the New England Vampire Panic. At the time of Lena's death, her mother and sister had also died from tuberculosis, and her brother Edwin was recovering. However, after she died, Edwin took a turn for the worse. Her father, George, suspected evil forces at play, and that the 3 dead female family members were leaving their graves to feed on his son. Neighbors were asked to dig up the graves and see if any of the bodies contained fresh blood. They did so March 17, 1892, 2 months to the day Lena had died. The neighbors discovered that the mother and sister had decomposed to bones, but Lena, who had been buried in the winter, was still preserved. A newspaper account recorded the heart and liver were removed, and in cutting open the heart, clotted and decomposed blood was found. A doctor determined she had died from tuberculosis, but the neighbors were not taking any chances and had her organs burned. The ashes were gathered, probably mixed with water and medicine, and fed to Edwin, which was a common folk remedy against vampirism. To no one's surprise today, Edwin died 2 months later. News reports of the macabre disinterments were first published in the Providence Journal newspaper, so it's very likely that Lovecraft's family was well aware of it, and Grandfather Phillips probably recounted it to his grandson when older. The town of Exeter gets mentioned a few times in the shunned house, such as when the townsfolk exhumed a dead body and ceremoniously burned its heart in order to prevent certain alleged visitations injurious to the public health and peace. This was not the only work of horror to be inspired by the Exeter incident. Bram Stoker had a clipping of the account and others in his collection, which may have inspired him in penning Dracula, which was published 5 years later. Lovecraft peppered folklore in other stories, such as The Unnamable, Dunwich Horror, and even Whisper in the Darkness. Instead of simply retelling old stories, Lovecraft preferred reworking folk tales to create what he called new artificial myths, and encouraged other writers to do the same. By blending familiar tales of his own imaginative narratives, he blurred the line between truth and fiction, giving his stories an air of believability, familiarity, and gravitas. The best example is the confusion over whether the Necronomicon as a book exists or not. Originally, the author's fascination with folklore served another purpose. It was a way to preserve a way of life. Motivated by an anti-modernist rejection of industrial capitalism and everything that surrounded it, including commercialism, mass consumerism, and immigration, according to Dr. Tim Evans, Lovecraft combined an antiquarian interest in folklore and historical material culture with the passions of a preservationist and the worries about cultural loss and misconstitution. For this agenda, he brought the literary traditions of supernatural fiction, travel narrative, and regional local color to create a unique body of work that drew its authoritative voice from the use and invention of folklore. In his later years, folklore took on a different meaning. He was coming to accept that the world was changing and filled with different people, and was coming to his acceptance of its transformation, and even embracing it. This change in perspective is best exemplified in Shadow over Innsmouth. For folklore to thrive, it has to be passed on from one generation to another, and Lovecraft succeeded in this aspect in ways that he would not have imagined. A circle of young writers were encouraged by Lovecraft himself to not only use elements from his newly created folklore, but to add their own contributions. In turn, Lovecraft would incorporate their additions into his works, therefore blurring the line of what portions of the cosmic horror belong to whom. We will expand upon these thoughts at a future point. At this moment, the great old ones require us to move into discussions less restrictive and more free. Before handing the reins over, let me mention that currently a mashup between Lovecraft and the Brothers Grimm exists. It is called Mythos Grimly, an anthology of stories based on, some barely, the output of these three men, such as the Dunwich Ball, which is a retelling of Cinderella. Some of the stories have no connection to the Grimms, such as the Black Goat of the 100-Acre Wood, which is based on Winnie the Pooh. One reviewer on Goodreads.com stated, nearly all the stories are interesting and most are well written. My criticism would be the uneven editing. A couple are so poorly proofread that reading them is irritating. She described the House of Sleeping Beauties as so tense, so disturbing, I think this one will stick with me for quite a while. Interested parties can go to Kickstarter to not only purchase a copy of the book, but also receive plush dolls such as Little Red Riding Cthulhu. Lovecraft would have never imagined that. Professor Guppy, Mr. Wilson, I turn the forum over to you. Cherish his freedom the elder gods have graced you with.
Sounds good.
Just a
What
little
are we
note.
talking about?
Just a little note.
What's that?
I actually went to one of the towns where they had one of those vampire panics in Woodstock, Vermont, and I saw the site where they allegedly cut open someone's heart, and they burned it on the greens of the town in an iron bucket, and then they buried the bucket somewhere in the town.
Do they have a plaque up commemorating it or something?
Nothing like that. It's so heavy tourized. They have all these little boutique shops, and everybody just go around doing shopping, which seemed like a really odd thing because there's nothing really else there, except you just go there do shopping. All that.
Okay.
So what's going on with Lovecraft today?
Well, what do you think, Richard?
That's interesting that as far as you talk about the folklore aspect in terms of it being passed on to other authors and that type of thing, because now you see that really Lovecraft has become kind of a genre unto itself, with different authors expanding on or doing, again, like you were talking about, let's say like they're doing a mashup of Grimm's tales with Lovecraft. You see entire comic runs like the Dark Horse comics like Fall of Cthulhu and that type of thing, that are writers who do pretty much nothing but Lovecraft themed horror, as far as, adding their own spins to it, anthologies of other authors that are taking it and, doing, say, like updated imaginings involving social media or internet and that type of thing, into those stories, like updates and that type of thing. Or, again, as far as for probably the more high profile one that we'd be looking at would be the Lovecraft country that's being adapted for HBO, with a trailer coming out for that. Their TV viewers and that type of thing, and then becoming a little more familiar as opposed to book readers and that type of thing.
Yeah, there's everything, video games, role-playing games.
Oh yeah, I played. There's a new game out, or a demo, I should say, of a new game out called The Shore, which is shamelessly wears its Lovecraft inspiration on its sleeve, as in terms of with the lighthouses, in an abandoned, island that you're exploring, and all the little Easter eggs of it, and then even awakening Cthulhu at the end of it. It's a downloadable. It's very, very well done as far as, in terms of all the detail work and that type of thing. I'd be interested in playing the full version. But as far as people just not even being coy about it anymore, in terms of, no, this is just openly, a Lovecraft themed game or a Cthulhu Mythos game, versus, say, even like 80s and 90s, you might have a character who's clearly inspired by Lovecraft type stories and that type of thing, but they're not using the names of those same entities, the names of those same towns, that type of thing.
Yeah, it's really got to the point today where it's most people probably haven't even read anything by Lovecraft, but still enjoy it.
Exactly, yeah. Where people haven't even touched the source material, don't know anything about it, but they just know about it through the osmosis into popular culture. Where you can title something, as far as, again, using a Lovecraft country, and people are going to know what that means. Ooh, it's cosmic horror of some kind or whatever, as opposed to, what does that mean?
A lot of Lovecraft would be a little bit difficult or dry, to say the least, compared to some of the more modern stories that are taken off on him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what age group you would be looking at that might be interested in reading it. It's probably a tough sell.
Right, where you're reading it then almost just to be kind of I just say that you've read the original work, in terms of, versus I just saw the short story, the horror 80s horror movie that Colorado Space was based off of Colorado Space, that type of thing. That, oh no, I've read the original work, to say that you've done it, but without all these other things kind of pointing back to that source material, would there be as much interest? And then because I think that's why you see so many of these continually reprinting these adaptations, or not, or I should say adaptations, but reprints of the original works, collecting the Cthulhu Mythos stories and that type of thing into year after year of this many reprintings, that many reprintings of it, because there's that kind of demand of people who are coming into it for the first time through video game or an RPG or a comic book or a movie or a TV show or something like that, as opposed to hearing about it, as, oh, well, here's this book that you need to read.
Well, and of course, a great deal of it's in the public domain. So reprints are a big deal out there right now, especially you've got the big Barnes and Noble deluxe editions with leather covers and all that. And yeah, several years ago, I bought a copy of a digital version on Amazon for like, I don't know, $3 that some girl had put together. And I mean, she did a lot. She did a good job typesetting it. And, she just put it all together and put it out there. So I guess anybody can do that kind of thing.
Yeah, anybody can. It's all in the public domain. Now, the only thing is, like, a lot of times books will add like illustrations or do something creative with the font, or
Right.
design.
Right, a physical book versus that kind of the ability to self-publish now so much, particularly in an ebook format. And then with that public domain, aspect of it means that you have that much more material, that many more authors, that are doing their own spin on it and putting it out there.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And most of his works are available online. You can go to a certain website and you can pick them up.
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
They're like three of the stories that you can't get, and I'm not sure why, but they're not like his most famous stuff. They're kind of very little known stuff.
Or the deep cuts and B-sides and whatnot.
Yeah, I think things are kind of like more of like afterthoughts than him, than something like of a serious matter. And I don't think any of them were the ghostwritten works. I think most are just kind of just stuff he just wrote. And which the weird thing is, some is lesser important. Some of this stuff is like juvenilia you can pick up and read online. Like a lot of his really early stuff. And so he was so he's like going back to talking about how, did I just see Princess Cthulhu?
Yeah.
Yes.
An astral projection.
Yeah, she just made her appearance and all that. Yes. It's good to see you, Princess Cthulhu. Yes. 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 We feel blessed today for your presence. And all that. But just the theme of Lovecraft, is like it's almost like someone just kept on going. He wasn't really it's something he was writing to create an atmosphere, for his stories. He said he was creating an atmosphere, but I think it was more like world building that he was doing.
Sure. Yeah, that's what I think so as well, because so many people, that's kind of what they've run with, less about atmosphere, more almost about, again, taking these characters and ideas and that type of thing and expanding on them. That's where you get as far as, again, because, we talk about a Necronomicon being a fictional book, and then the next thing you know, someone's penned an actual Necronomicon and published it out there and put it out, because as far as that'd be a cool idea, let's make a Necronomicon.
Yeah, there are at least 2 versions of the Necronomicon out there.
Yeah, I've got one of them. I need to dig that up, and we can review that for a future episode. But there's several versions, of various books floating around there purporting to be, and then entering it to kind of, pushing that narrative of, oh, this is the Necronomicon that's talked about in these books.
Yeah.
And not realizing, well, that didn't exist, but somebody thought it would be fun to write, and so they took the ball and ran with it in the same way that with the likes of Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, taking those characters' ideas, and then so many people have taken those and adapted them far further than I'm sure the original authors ever thought that they would run with those ideas.
Sure.
Yeah, I could imagine like Bram Stoker or like even Lovecraft, realizing just how popular their characters are today.
Exactly, yeah, that you would have movies and T-shirts and memorabilia and comics and other and tons
plush
of
animals and
countless other books about that same subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, oh well, I was just from such humble beginnings.
Yes.
For him to have died in such impoverished circumstances, it's really ironic. And of course, that's the story of a lot of artists, but I don't know, the one that I've studied so much. I mean, it's more personal, I guess, but it would be interesting to know what they would think.
Yeah, they could travel in the future and see what happened. Especially when Lovecraft, he was asked to adapt one of his stories into radio, and he turned it down. If he didn't care for being adapted to the radio, how would it felt like being adapted to film?
Exactly. Video? Yeah, again, going through exponentially. That's so much more in terms of, oh, well, you thought that adapted for radio would be bastardization or whatever of your work. Imagine what people making, into, safe and cuddly for kids, or, taking it and mashing it up with this other author's work, or, that type of thing.
Or like a children's programming, there's like a kids movie about Cthulhu,
Yeah.
So, it's just would he have approved of that, seeing, that little kids can watch his stuff without actually having to read it.
Right. I have the DVD somewhere. It's like Howard Lovecraft or
Howard Lovecraft. I can't remember the something or another, and I'm trying to
the Ice Kingdom or something like that.
Yeah. I wasn't able to go through it all because it was digitally animated, and it looked like
the animation's terrible.
Bare minimum effort,
Yeah, they did a really bad job of rendering that.
Right.
It looked poorly done. It looks like more like a simulation. They would see in one of those reenactment of crimes. You would see it done in Japanese news shows.
It's not quite as terrible as I don't know, a few things I've seen, but it's up there. It's about like Veggie Tales.
I was about to ask what the tone of it was, whether it was kind of for all ages or if it was really sanitized for kids, and
it's for kids.
Yeah.
The animation put me off from watching it, so I hadn't actually seen it.
Yeah. I'm not sure there are any really true scary moments in it. There may be some parts where it's they come across a monster and go, that type of thing, but that's about it. But nothing more you've seen of Scooby-Doo.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
Yeah. It's not really.
You're taking his sensibilities and mixing it with, say, in this case, a Scooby-Doo cartoon. So.
Yeah, making to a kids film, and so but the animation I think is the biggest drawback against it. It'd be an okay cartoon, and the few kids I've seen watch it, they seem to enjoy it. They seem to look past the animation, so it doesn't really matter to them. But they seem to enjoy the story. So I guess you can call it gateway.
You're a little more accepting at a younger age of shoddy animation as you get older than start getting.
Yeah. Right now,
did you even put any effort into this?
Yeah, I guess it's a gateway drug, the Lovecraft. For that.
That's true.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess we'll wrap up. The stars are no longer in the session for us, so we need to wrap up. 30 Minutes of H.P. Lovecraft was created in association with www.lovecraftpod.com, the Logan Speculative Fiction Group, with the help of the Logan County Public Library, and Lovecraft Eternal Facebook page, the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast, and the Great Old Ones. Until we meet again, may you avoid the wrath of Princess Cthulhu. Until next month, folks.
Bye.
Okay.